Hi everyone. In this video, we'll be discussing about the coagulation cascade, coagulation tests, and the anticoagulants. Now, why I decided to make a video on this topic is I found the coagulation cascade confusing and unable to memorize it. Okay, so and I've been seeing that it has an application till the end of third year. So once you know the coagulation cascade, you will know what are the diseases that come when a certain factor in the coagulation cascade is affected, what are all the coagulation tests that are involved with respect to the coagulation cascade, and how you must prescribe or use anticoagulants for specific diseases and for specific conditions, right? And the tricky part here is the coagulation cascade, if you can remember, it comes with a lot of factors and it's quite difficult to remember the flow, right? Even though we try to memorize it each time before we go to the exam, it's quite difficult to remember it. But now I've figured out a simple mnemonic or a way to remember the entire coagulation cascade pathway so that you can apply it wherever you want to find out which factor is missing, what kind of test to do, and what test is applicable for which pathway, and what anticoagulant is affecting which pathway, and to which condition should we use a specific anticoagulant. All right, so let's get started. So first, as you know, the factors that are involved in the coagulation cascade are produced primarily in the liver. So you should have a basic understanding that when the liver is not functional, let's say it is cirrhotic, or let's say the liver is undergoing degeneration or any kind of disease, hepatitis, the factors involved in the coagulation cascade are going to be affected. So that's like a common logic that you must understand. So as you all know, the coagulation consists of two pathways, the intrinsic pathway and the extrinsic pathway, right? So what I want you to remember is, for the intrinsic pathway, remember the word tenet. If you know the Christopher Nolan movie, then just remember the word tenet, okay? And for extrinsic pathway, just remember tissue factor is 7 out of 10, okay? So tenet and tissue factor is 7 out of 10. Now let me relate it to this. The intrinsic pathway starts with 12, factor 12, okay? And the active part of 12 is 12A, right? So T for 12. And then next it activates 11. 12A activates factor 11 and that becomes 11A. So what's 11E, right? And then 9. 11A activates 9 and that becomes 9A. So that's your N. Okay, so we got 10, 11, 9. All right, and then E for 8. So 9 is going to activate, 9A is going to activate 8 to become 8A. So E. And then it enters the common pathway, that's again 10, right? So 12, 11, 9, 8, 10. So the only thing that's missing here in between is 10, right? The 10, because 10 is the start of the common pathway. You got to have that in your mind. 10 is the start of the common pathway, whereas 12, 11, 9 and 8 is part of the intrinsic pathway, and you can remember it as tenet. Alright, now what about the extrinsic pathway? Extrinsic pathway starts with your tissue factor, which is your factor 3. Alright, so factor 3 is converted into 3A, which then converts factor 7 into 7A, and then which then again joins the common pathway, and that converts 10 into 10A. So that's why T, which is your tissue factor TF, which is factor 3, is 7 out of 10. So it converts 7A, then the 7A converts 10 into 10A. So tissue factor is 7 out of 10. That's the mnemonic for extrinsic pathway. So tenet and tissue factor is 7 out of 10. Now trust me, this mnemonic has been very useful for me, and I don't think I'll ever forget the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway from this point onwards, right? So now all of this has led to your common pathway, right? So in this common pathway, the 10A is joined by your 5A, factor 5A, to activate prothrombin. So prothrombin is your factor 2. Now pro, right? So that means it's an inactivated form. Now that gets converted into thrombin, that's 2A. Okay, now this thrombin goes to the final step of this reaction, converts fibrinogen, which is factor 1, into fibrin, 1A. Okay, so since fibrin is the final thing, remember it is always the first factor, like factor 1 and factor 1A. Whereas thrombin is the step before that, so it's the second one. So thrombin 2A and prothrombin is 2. So this is just for remembering it. Now this fibrin helps to form the fibrin clot. So this is the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway and the common pathway in general. Okay, so remember tenet and tissue factor is 7 out of 10. Okay, and remember the common pathway, prothrombin is 2 and fibrinogen is 1, and they get activated into 2A and 1A. Now also another fact to remember here is the extrinsic pathway and the common pathway these ones are dependent on vitamin K. Okay, so now you can relate to when there is vitamin K deficiency or there is toxicity or something like that, you can relate to which factors in the coagulation cascade is going to be affected first. That is going to be your extrinsic pathway and the common pathway, because they are dependent on vitamin K. All right, so now the coagulation cannot keep happening, right? If there's going to be a lot of coagulation, there's going to be a lot of let's say a lot of coagulation, unnecessary coagulation. There's going to be a lot of clots being formed, and that's going to cause thrombosis and embolism, right? And that's fatal. You don't want that to happen. So as a result, there are natural breaks for coagulation in our coagulation cascade pathway too. So those are your protein C and protein S. So what happens is, remember thrombin is factor 2A. Okay, thrombin, when it comes in contact with thrombomodulin during normal conditions, which is produced by our endothelial cells, it goes and attaches to protein C and forms a complex, APC. Okay, and this complex along with protein S is going to go and inhibit certain factors which are your 5A and 8A. Remember, 5A is part of your common pathway, right? The 5A is part of your common pathway, and 8A is part of your intrinsic pathway. I'm sorry, yeah, the intrinsic pathway. So this factor is going to go, this process in a normal blood vessel, okay, to prevent coagulation from happening, thrombin is going to bind to thrombomodulin, and then protein C form a complex, and along with protein S, it's going to inhibit your common and your intrinsic pathway specifically, so that there is no unnecessary coagulation. So that's why these are called natural breaks of your coagulation. Okay, now for the most interesting part, there are certain the coagulation profile, right, to which you order for patients with bleeding disorders and all that. You order a coagulation profile. So for that, a simple trick to remember the difference between prothrombin time and activated partial thromboplastin time is to remember prothrombin time, PT. It has one T, right? So it's tennis. Tennis is an outdoor game, right? You see people playing tennis outdoor. Whereas you take APTT, APTT has two T's, so that means it's table tennis, whereas table tennis is your indoor game. So remember, PT, outdoor game, is used to measure your extrinsic and your common pathway. So that's what I've mentioned here, extrinsic and common pathway. Whereas your APTT, since table tennis, it's an indoor game, it's used to measure your intrinsic and common pathway. Fine. Now remember, extrinsic and common pathway are mostly vitamin K dependent. So if there's going to be vitamin K deficiency, or if a person undergoes warfarin therapy or any liver disease, then you need to test the coagulation profile specifically for your prothrombin time. Okay, whereas for APTT, it comes when there is hemophilia. Intrinsic and common, where factor 8 or factor 9 deficiency is there, or any heparin therapy, or any severe liver disease, or DIC for any case, because disseminated intravascular coagulation could be applicable for any case, and then you need to look at all these levels. All right, now you can go through the other parts. It's just quite simple. I just wanted to give you a trick to remember which specific test is going to be applicable for which specific pathway, so that you can relate to it. So prothrombin time, tennis, outdoor, so it's extrinsic and common pathway. Activated partial thromboplastin time, TT, so table tennis, intrinsic and common pathway. Alright, now these are some common drugs that I want you to go through, but let me just give you an idea of what I wanted to tell you here. So let's talk about anticoagulants. You take vitamin K antagonists. Those are going to go and directly inhibit your vitamin K dependent factors, which are present in your extrinsic and common pathway, as you can see 2, 7, 9, 10. Okay, whereas the ones in your extrinsic and common pathway. Whereas let's take your this slide. Yeah, let's take your heparin. They are going to go and enhance the antithrombin activity by inhibiting your thrombin 2A and your factor 10A, which is part of a common pathway. Whereas your direct thrombin inhibitors are going to directly go and inhibit factor 2A. You can check for the examples here. And then factor 10A inhibitors are these, and they're going to inhibit directly your factor 10A. Alright. Now there are some antiplatelet drugs. Now, if you would have seen my previous video based on the cyclooxygenase pathway, I would have explained about these over there. Now, there are also some procoagulants, obviously vitamin K, because it's dependent on vitamin K, the common and extrinsic pathway. So yeah, that's how it is. Now, finally, there's an important fact that you must know, that there are different kinds of heparins, right? And the main one I wanted to talk about here is your unfractionated heparin and then low molecular weight heparin. What's the difference between these two? Here's a simple explanation for that. The unfractionated heparin is heterogeneous and large molecule, whereas a low molecular weight heparin is smaller and more uniform molecules. Okay, the mechanism of action here is that the unfractionated is going to inhibit both 10A and 2A, and that's why it's very rapid. Whereas the LMWH is going to inhibit only 10A specifically and some 2A, that's why it has a slower action than your unfractionated heparin. And the half-life is very short because the action is very rapid, whereas the half-life is very longer for low molecular weight heparin. Now, the risk for developing heparin-induced thrombocytopenia is higher because it's very rapid here, whereas it's lower here. Now, the reversal agent usually given for the heparin is protamine sulfate. And when you give protamine sulfate, after giving unfractionated heparin, there is complete reversal. Whereas for this case, there is partial reversal. Okay, these are the differences. Now, I hope you really got an idea about the coagulation cascade and the applications of it. I would definitely recommend you to go and read about it more and learn more about it. Thank you so much.